being one of them, but into the late game it can. You want to set up multiple turns where, like, it's a Bone Chimera this turn along with, say, an Andrealphus, and then they pop your board. Turn after, you play Prince Catacomb, set up that board again. They pop the board. Then you do the same thing. You just rinse, repeat. Bone Chimera plus threats, or another Prince Catacomb, turn after turn. Once you get to that stage of 7+ play points, so that you can always effectively have a board that threatens lethal.
Right. Kind of said it better myself. I think, especially just at post Prince Catacomb turning into a 4-cost card rather than a 3-cost card, it's not as obvious as it used to be, where you could just play Skull Beast or Goblin into Soul Squasher or any 2-drop into Catacomb, and that was extremely difficult to deal with without stuff like Blazing Breath, especially if you were on the draw. But now that it costs 4, you have to put a little bit more thought into it. Your opponent has more time to develop followers on board or removal spells to kind of decrease his value. So things like Bone Chimera become that much more important when they generate more bodies to kind of make up for the bodies you'd lose.
Right, and the one benefit that Shadow does have, especially against cards like Bahamut, is Lurching Corpse. Lurching Corpse is one of those cards where you'll play it if it's the curve that you have, right? If it's your only 2-drop, so you can start pushing damage early. But you don't really want to throw it out there because a Blazing Breath or an early Breath of the Salamander can really negate a lot of the advantage you can gain out of that card over time. But you can play it if you think your opponent's best response to you is a Bahamut, so that they can't really play the Bahamut. They have to go through a different line of play, and sometimes it's the only option that these Bahamut decks have. They have to do it and lose the Bahamut, which feels amazing.
We'll probably see that definitely this game. I mean, the only thing that I'm a little worried about, and I mentioned this earlier, is Eplicas's mid-shadow list. It looks very defensive to me. It has 2 Saber Altars / Dark Blade Fiends, 2 Death Breaths. We've seen how defensively it's had to play before. I mean, I think that there's definitely a place for this deck. It probably just completely trashes aggro entirely. But I think that these techs aren't ideal for dealing with combo or control matchups. And we might see that especially occur here against these 2 very value-packed lists that Gengur's bringing.
I find it interesting, right? So, like, in EU yesterday, we saw a Tentative Knights, we saw Urds, we saw, all of these anti-control Shadow cards getting to the point where it was even getting banned because of how effective it was against all of these slower decks. And then today, in the NA side, we just see a reversion right back to the regular mid-Shadow that doesn't have any of these anti-control techs, which I think, again, would play a huge part in winning these matchups, right? We're talking about Ramp Dragon, Neutral Force, Control Blood, like, all these decks being played today, but not the Shadow decks that are teched against it. And Shadows looked really weak today. Like, really, really weak today.
Alright, I mean, if you really think about it, this is a very small pool of players that are probably parts of, like, pretty much larger communities, very different regions. So the conversations that are happening about what decks are strong, how do you build decks that are proven to be strong, can lead to a lot of diversity, and maybe EU has just talked about, centered down on, and focused on mid-Shadow as a list with much greater import than NA has. Perhaps NA just recognizes its strengths, a lot of people bring it, but they aren't really looking at ways to develop this to tech it against certain matchups. They're just playing good cards, or cards that they recognize, alright, this is super useful, put it in. And that's really the end of the discussion, and they've been focusing on other stuff. Like Dragon, I think, is a class that NA has been massively developing and innovating over time.
Oh yeah. I mean, we see all variations from Ariats to Urds to Saha with Queen of the Dread Sea, Fortes in, Fortes out. You know what I mean? They're not in every single Dragon deck anymore. How many Genesis Dragons do you play? How many Zeuses do you play? Like all of these options. And they've been changing rapidly from week to week. I think NA, as far as Dragon is concerned, has been going far above and beyond working on Dragon.
Yeah, I mean, even Gengur's list today is pretty... it's a significant departure from what I'm used to of seeing of Dragon, in that what I'm used to is either it's combo, and it focuses entirely on combo plus Storm / other cards to get in that poke, or it's Saha Quill and it's focused on I never die, I can never lose to anything that isn't combo. And then we have Gengur doing both at the same time, and honestly, it looks amazing. He's still made this list look just as strong as any other Dragon deck, despite how much he departs from it. I think that, like, different kind of experimentation and different focus on it is what leads to such a, like, separately developed kind of metagame throughout all the different regions.
I have to agree. And looking at the hands here, I mean, I really can't find a spot to where Eplicas can be ahead in this matchup. If I was Gengur, I actually would have played that turn a little differently. I probably would have gone with a Blazing Breath on the Lurching Corpse into a Sybil to set up going to 10 on the following turn instead of waiting. But Gengur still has 2 Evo points left. He has an Israfil. He has a Sockquill. He's not worried. But all of these things that Gengur has in hand versus what Eplicas has, I think this game's almost already over.
Right. It's not like Eplicas is completely dry of card draw, but I think it's just the inability to develop too much.
Okay, never mind.
I was about to say he doesn't really have anything to develop into, but his skeletons have skeletons now, and I think that's the comeback that he needs.
That's exactly what he needed to see, absolutely. So he can attack with one of these skeletons, play out a Demon Eater to draw if he wants to, and then follow that up with a Prince Catacomb to set him up for an Ektar turn, which is perfect. That was probably the best card he could have drawn there.
Yeah. Except knowing me, I think the best play is you Prince Catacomb and then you Demon Eater the Catacomb to get rid of the flesh. Then you have 5 effective skeletons on board, and that is really just it. I mean, how does Gengur even touch his keyboard after that?
Skeletons are too scary, man.
I would develop playstyle after kind of having a relationship with this token. You know, like there's an emblem for skeleton. Like every account has it. Like.
That's true. That's true, and it is very terrifying. So enlighten the people as to what you mean by this, because some of the people, of course, out there did not watch the charity event. Talk to them.
Right. I like never want to provide context with it because I don't want them to actually see what I did. Right. The charity event pretty recently, we had a lot of fun. We played decks that were a little tongue-in-cheek, weren't really meant to win games per se, but meant to just have a lot of fun and show off some funny stuff. And my particular arts and crafts project was I had a skeleton sitting at my chair, and then I searched in the search bar of Shadowverse everything that summoned the skeleton token, and just put them all in as 3. And this, what you're looking at right now, is what my board was every single game. It was just one thing that might questionably not be a skeleton, and everything else was just this token. But I mean, that's about it. That's how you kind of win this matchup, is you want to have as much of a development as of skeleton tokens as you can, just through developing that Prince Catacomb.
Yep. Yes, very interesting. Skeletons, my friend, they can be very scary. And with Eplicas even drawing that Prince Catacomb without a way to really push any more advantage here, again, he does have the Bone Chimera, so he can set up smaller plays, but with Gengur being at 15, already being at 10, he already has like almost everything he needs, right? He's got a Genesis Dragon into an Erd if he wants to go that path. He can just play Israfil defensively. He can play Bahamut defensively. He also has a Sybil to just stall if he wants to. This is going to be rough for Eplicas. He's got to make really important decisions here and can't really misstep at all.
Right. I think if Eplicas has a particular chance of going back into it, what he needs to find is every remaining copy of Ictor and Thane, or at least they need to be pretty soon into his deck. Because I think this is the exact time window where just playing those cards can recover Shadow from any losing position into a position of my value beats any level of aggression or card advantage my opponent might have had previously. But if he doesn't, then he might spend too much time dawdling, and Gengur already, as you've already observed, has more than enough options to close out the game.
And it looks like he's going to go for the card draw first just to see what he draws. Not a bad draw. Dust Breath very good here. Circumvents the Israfil 2 damage mark, which is really nice.
Though I do think that his hand at the moment remains pretty weak to Bahamut, if Gengur decides to go for it.
That's true. That's true. He would have to expend an Ektar plus an Evo, something to that effect, in order just to deal with the Bahamut, which would then clear off the board, of course.
But Gengur, not completely sure of what Eplicas is holding onto, does make the Bahamut a pretty not obvious decision for him.
He doesn't really need a Bahamut here, so what he could do is he could play a Sybil and an Ayala, just do some simple plays here. Go back up to 17, clear out most of this board, leave 1, 2, 3. Could have even played like an Erd if you wanted to expend that resource just to take ward off of one of the zombies. Definitely doesn't need to do that. And just play safe here. I don't see anything wrong with this play.
Right. I mean, as opposed to Bahamut, honestly, it's not too much different than even developing it, other than just holding it, because this still does flip the board with an Evo point. It gives Eplicas time to develop something like an Ictor, which could help clear this, but, I mean, Gengur doesn't really care too much about that. He's got answers. He still has that last Evo point, so between that the Genesis Dragon Erd combo, which is waiting for a Dread Sea to activate, the Bahamut, which is ready to clear any level of threat that Eplicas commits into, and Gengur's in a really great spot. He can answer more or less anything of this next, like, turn or two, and this is, like, the window where Eplicas has to make something happen.
And it's funny, too, because that Sybil, while being very unassuming, just a 3-4, right? If you don't answer it immediately, it does that Ceres effect that we saw be so important yesterday. And that if it just sits there and play turn after turn, you just lose every advantage that you gained in the early game, right? So it's like you never did anything. Or like your example, right? It's like erasing that Crimson sorcery that was played. Those things just never happened.
It matters a lot. Like, you don't get that much damage in Shadowcraft. Or at least, like, I mean, a lot of people probably have Ictor flashbacks when I say that. But, like, let's say Ictor is the main source of damage that you're counting here. Then if Sybil heals you for 6, then Ictor pushing 3 followers' face just got erased, effectively. That damage didn't happen. I mean, that is the power of healing in this game. I think it very often trumps how useful wards can even be. Just in terms of how much of a late-game threats they just tend to completely nullify. But out comes the Bahamut, just erases Ictor. No Evo point left on the side of Eplicas, so I have to deal with this one the good old-fashioned way.
Yeah, this is tough. So, like, you think, or at least you would appear to think, that you're not dead next turn if you play a Thane, right? Because they still have to eat through that, even with the Death's Breath. They don't have enough damage after that to really kill you. Would you have gone with this Death's Breath play as, like, kind of like a defensive option, or would you have gone with Thane so that maybe you can build up to a White King to actually deal with this Bahamut?
Honestly, I think the best time for the Thane was going to be before the Ictor, because you know you only have 1 evolution point left. How is that White King going to get to hit something of your choice? And that really just comes down to dealing with the Ictor. But he wanted to expend it and try to get onto the board last turn, walks into a Bahamut, and that, I think, could be the end of Eplicas. So right there, in that specific situation, I think really all Eplicas is doing is trying to play it safe and develop a board that's really impossible to push through immediately, even though it's very unlikely he particularly finds any options later that are going to get him out of this spot.
Yeah, this is rough. Having to deal with an evolved Israfil and a Bahamut without having a straight-up removal for either at the moment. This is one of those times where you really wish you had Lurching Corpses, but haven't drawn any.
Funny enough, as much as I noticed the card not really being that fantastic recently, Necro Assassin would be pretty fantastic here.
Yeah, yes it would. Now, there is a way this turn, if he uses his play... Well, I was going to say if he uses play points a little differently here. He could have played Andrialphus into Demon Eater and drawn into something to that effect, like drawn, like we see now, Lurching Corpse into another sack outlet, but he opts for the Ward, which is a safe play. And it's guaranteed. It's something that you know you have as opposed to hoping for something. But I don't think this is going to be enough to stop the onslaught of this Genesis Dragon and everything else that's happening.
Very clean swing inwards, just 20 damage. You know, if you don't have an answer to Bahamut over time, this isn't a boss fight that you're, like, destined to win as the protagonist. It's
right.
You get this guy off, and, like, a single attack is really all he can really get on you. After that point, you probably want to answer him, or else the next 10 play point turn of the opponent is just going to shrug off whatever of a raid party you kind of manage to try to kind of hold him off with.
Yeah, and bosses have friends in this game, okay? They're not just solo by themselves. You can pick at them, you know, take 5 people in there and just keep beating them up until they're dead. Nope. One end boss, followed by another end boss, followed by his friend that comes in and wipes the board away.
One of my favorite things to do with Bahamut is back when Swordcraft still, you know, before Swordcraft got rotated as a class, the ability to put Bahamut
class,
in it. Yeah, it's an unlimited now. But
yeah,
playing Bahamut and then having him use Cyclone Blade is like the most jaw-dropping mental image I've ever like been given of like Bahamut actually just unsheathing a katana and just decapitating everything.
Being a dragon and needing to use a sword to decapitate everything seems like a little bit of overwinning, right? Like he's already won, right? I don't know why you also need a sword, but that is pretty terrifying. If a dragon did have a sword, how big would that sword be? Especially one big enough to decapitate an entire army. You know what I mean? Whew. In like one fell swoop.
That's a pretty big sword.
That's a scary dragon. Okay.
Yeah, this makes me nostalgic of the same mental image with Hamza, and I miss swords sometimes, but not a part of either today or yesterday's tournament really. Perhaps it'll take a rotation or something like that to get the class back on its feet. But on to the next game. This is, I think, a very important game for Gengur, because I don't know if I could really say that Neutral Forest always has a good matchup into Burn Room. I wouldn't really say it's a bad one.
I can't say that. I can't say it's a bad matchup, but I don't think it's something that you want to play. Like, if you're on the ladder and you have Neutral Forest and you're just gaming games, you probably don't really want to run into Burn Room that often, because it does have immediate answers to all of your big game threats, like Beauty the Beast.
Yeah, it's a much more of a nuisance of a matchup than is dealing with just like aggro or even mid-range. Sometimes is something that this deck just has a sometimes uncontested ability to just destroy. Like, Mid Shadow itself also struggles a bit with the problem of, if Beauty and the Beast comes down, your answer to it is going to be some combination of mashing your entire board into it, really. You hopefully you're on the play, hopefully you have a lot of skeletons, and hopefully you have an Ictor right there for it. Because other than that, Force is capable of a lot of tricks that just kind of easily rush over whatever Shadow's able to put up with.
My songs are heartfelt.
This is an interesting use of an Evo here. I think mostly just because he wants to get value out of the fact that he needs to pump the power of this Pure-Hearted Singer just so he can trade with the board more effectively. I don't know if he needed to do that, though.
Right. I can see a couple reasons behind it. I mean, evolving Pure-Hearted Singer, I think, is always kind of it has the second benefit to it that evolving a lot of other followers doesn't quite have. That's kind of similar to a Tentative Knight or Lurching Corpse, where you've increased the threat potential of a card which otherwise only existed as a card that provided you value. Your opponent has to deal with it, but they give you value in the process of having to deal with it. So perhaps Gengur just thinking, I do want to go for this card draw here. I've got answers to kind of take the board back that makes up for its otherwise low stat line. It's probably going to be fine to just kind of go for that.
I dig it. Another thought might also be because, you know, I want to play the Staircase next turn to pop it to refill my hand, and if I don't Evo this Pure-Hearted Singer now, it's not going to get as much value over the course of the next 2 turns as I'd like it to, so, okay. And plus he doesn't really have a super strong 5-drop outside of Staircase. Like, he's got, what, Actrosperia, possibly, maybe an Elf Twins Assault, if he wants to play that.
I don't think that Neutral Forest is really a deck where you care too much to mill, to be honest. Like, maybe here it might be a bit of a stretch if he went for it. Especially with 2 in hand, I think he'd develop with something. Oof.
Eplicas playing so defensively in this matchup. I don't know if you can afford to do this. I don't know if you can afford to spend your turns trading into the board of Gengur, especially a Pure-Hearted Singer. With basically all of his threats, gave away his Bone Chimera to do so, just to draw some cards instead of furthering his board with something like a Saber Altar. Very interesting choice to me.
Yeah, having skeletons is a much more ideal situation than is having a Ceres on board, but, well, Eplicas has his 8 shadows. He has no outlet of how to use them other than his Soul Squasher, which he could just hold next turn. So Gengur having that ideal Beauty and the Beast on 6 could just get taken up by the zombies here.
It's mostly just Eplicas isn't finding ways to actually get damage in, and I feel like the later this game goes, the more in favor it shifts to Forest. So it's kind of like this thing where I feel like Eplicas needs to put on the fantasy hat right now, right? And just even though he's playing a slower mid-rangey style of mid-shadow, still needs to put on that aggro cap and try to get in as much damage as he can while he can, because that's one of Neutral Forest's weaknesses, is that its curve is so high, right? It doesn't do a lot of things in the early game. So if you don't take your advantage where you can get it, I feel like it just starts to slip away.
Though that said, perhaps one of his lines of thought is, I don't really want to just kind of throw in all my resources and then have Hector propose any kind of a tough situation for me that I can't get over. So I think the name of the deck is like draw his money. So he's just drawing. That's it. He wants to win through card advantage. I could see that at the very least.
It's love.
That's absolutely fair. Now Eplicas can deal with this Beauty and the Beast. And this is the last Evo point out of Gengur. So Eplicas, like you said, maybe he's just playing this really extended, long, I'm going to outvalue. I mean, it is possible. It's not like Triple Thane, Triple Ektar can't outvalue decks. It's just, I feel like it gets a lot harder if you try to main that strategy as opposed to use it as a backup.
At the very least, like I think Beauty and the Beast is like the face of a card that just does not let you try to outvalue Forest as a class when you're playing Neutral Forest anyway. Because a lot of control decks just use a lot of removal spells, zombie party, the likes of otherwise, or destruction effects to try to get over every threat the opponent has, leading the beast shrugs it all off. But thankfully, Eplicas, past using Soul Squasher, had just enough to trade onto the board so that his Ictor could get fully committed into getting rid of that. Though, I think that doesn't leave him in an ideal situation either.
Yes, this Elf Twins Assault at the moment is only dealing, what, 2 damage? So not the best. So Ektar's going to live here.
Yeah, at the very least, these Kindly Trance are kind of here to back things up. A second Ictor, I think, is huge. That pushes an immense amount of attack and damage through these boards without any real commitment. If he goes for it, anyway.
I like it here because it's not like Forest has ramp, right? So if you can fill the board up against neutral Forest, like with huge followers, it gets really hard for Forest to deal with all of it. The only thing that can really even come back on a board like this, and it doesn't even fully come back if 2 Ektars are actually in play, is drawing into something like a Sahagwil Israfil play. It's really the only option that Gengur's deck has coming up after the staircase pops.
Right. I guess what Eplicas is thinking of then is to, like, do I have to pop the staircase this turn? Is it really that important to push the damage immediately? I mean, I think it is. I think it's absolutely right to just push here, but when you're playing mid-shadow, holding an Ictor is always a very tough call to make. Is like,
right.
He has a lot of ways to just kind of push past this with like a Saber Altar, and perhaps that's what he's going to do. Just evolve it, trade in a zombie, let Gengur get his cards. Nothing on turn 8 is probably going to swing this huge of a board back.
I don't think so. I mean, the staircase can get this Elf Twins Assault up high enough to actually deal with these bigger threats, but when they're protected by a ward, it makes it much harder to target the specific ones that you want. So I think this is a really good setup that Eplicas has played himself into. So he has played this value game into such a way that now he's transitioning into this super hardcore aggro plan. And again, when you draw this many Ektars, it feels really good to start pushing that way. So
yeah, I think the most important thing Gengur could have gotten right there was both Sahagwil and Israfil.
Right.
Because even though he has a pretty strong development of neutrals for Elf Twins Assault, playing Elf Twins Assault alongside another Beauty and the Beast is not that much of an answer to this board state and could put him in a really tough spot into this coming Ictor.
So ETA is at what now? 4? I see 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, it's at 4. So it can clear anything on the board. Is it at 5?
Yeah, I think so.
Area. I didn't count area. Yeah. Yeah. Missed 1 card. So yeah, still, in any case, able to clear anything off the board, but not consistently. Can't choose the targets. Might have to play an Aaron here? Ugh.
Maybe. It's all the heal. It's the only way he can both heal and remove stuff at the same time. The killing Ictor is pretty good. Maybe now, Aaron.
You're an intruder.
Okay. Did get a little lucky there. Didn't miss both of the big followers.
I think a really important call for Eplicas to have to make now is if you protect this Bone Chimera, you are set against anything like Bahamut if Gengur survives up through to the next turn after this one. Has a pretty massive hand, and Sahagwil is one of the only remaining methods of board impact that Gengur is still holding on to. But I think Bahamut is really the main game changer that Gengur has.
Yeah, and I think saying that, I think that's exactly why you should just go in with Ektar again here. You force this huge board, a ton of damage, right before the Bahamut can be played. There's not really a good reaction that Gengur's deck has. And if you just play kind of soft here, and what I mean by that is running like the Saber Altar plus the Bone Chimera in to this Aaron, and then just doing a couple points of damage this turn, you might not get a chance to set up for a big Ektar again.
Right. What Eplicas is definitely thinking about is, what do I have to play around? Do I have to play safe like that? I think the answer is absolutely no. Because it's not like Forest has a turn 9 board clear. If he has an Israfil in hand with Sahagwil, that's not going to clear through your Ictor. Doesn't have any Evo points, it's just 2 damage to all the little things that'll pop your Bone Chimera and you're fine. Does pop his own Chimera though. Could still go for a very aggressive stride here with Ictor.
And I like this line of play a lot. Again, this opens up 11 damage and a board that's very hard to deal with. No other Elf Twins Assault in hand for Gengur, and Eplicas smartly playing around that by adding more small followers to the board.
Ooh.
And I think that's just it, right?
Yeah, Saha Quill is not good enough. It doesn't have any further removal than just the Saber Altar.
Alright, so Eplicas, now we get to see this matchup again. Neutral Forest versus Burn Rune.
Alright, this is a super important matchup. This is I think it, right? It determines who is the third player in this last decision coming up.
Most important game of their day today. Do they win? Do they make it to the top 3? Do they lose? And do they crumble to third, fourth place, or to fourth, fifth, / 6th place?
Alright. Off the bat, we already kind of discussed. I think Burn Rune is like both of these decks here are like against each other. It's like they don't present any particular advantages or single cards that are just, well, if he plays this, I lose the game. Nothing in my deck can answer this. Like Mutagenic Bolt really is so important versus Beauty and the Beast for a deck that has such small stats on its followers. But otherwise, it's not like Neutral Forest has a great abundance of healing. It just has small incremental healing, which can be enough. It can go either way here, so last and most important game between these two players on a kind of even matchup.
And we finally see Eplicas get a draw that you'd normally want to see with Burn Rune. He's got the 1-drop Amulet into the 2-drop Magic Illusionist into a Mage of Nightfall if he so chooses to go down that road. Even has Red Hot Ritual to deal with this. Oh yeah, this is nice.
Oh my god, I think this is perfect for Eplicas, actually. He can dump out his whole hand straight into an Awe as well.
Oh, I don't like this, though. He just board filled. Now he can't play his Mage of Nightfall.
True, it's not like Gengur is going to play a Novice Trooper and hit into the 0-2 here, so...
Right.
Well,
right.
He can trade, but that is not a trade that he necessarily would have had to make.
I think you almost have to, just to preserve your tempo, right? Get cards out of your hand to make that Wizardess better. I think it would have just been better not to play the Scrap Iron Smelter, but okay. So he chooses to trade this way instead, losing out on a few points of damage here, but protecting his board.
Toss the Telescope. You want this Oz to be big on your 6-ish turn. Not going to want to play it on turn 5 for obvious reasons.
I feel like, you know, it's just a play style, right? It's a difference in how I'm thinking about the deck than he does. So the way he plays Mid Shadow and the way he plays Burn Rune is very value oriented. It's about getting as much value early in the game as he can with his cards, and then basically just hoping that his deck gets him there in the end game by the way he built it, right? He's not like looking just to push immediate advantages in damage, but more just be more calculated with controlling the board while he's dealing damage, and it shines through in both of these games here.
Yeah, I mean, you imagine a guy who names his deck Draws Money might be a value-oriented player. I find that pretty likely. No.
That's fair. That's very fair. And both of these decks do like to draw a decent amount of cards, especially with super powerful effects like Oz and Witch's Cauldron and Telescope that we all see here.
Right. I think that this game is looking pretty significantly in Eplicas' favor because, you know, this opening hand from him was just fantastic. He had an abundance of sigils, and on top of that, those sigils cycled themselves very well. He had a Telescope to work with it, a Cauldron into a Magic Illusionist. He's had board, he's had value, and he has the Oz for when this falls off. This is like the ideal dream that it's what I describe when I, like, by comparison, when I talk about when this deck seems to fail, is this is the opener you need. A lot of damage comes from followers despite it being Burn Rune. You don't burn your opponent from 20 to nothing. You gotta hit him with, like, an Evo point, this kind of board, this kind of setup. Now Master Mage, Levi, Dance of Death, all the burn options from Oz are, like, 2 or 3 copies of those cards are a lethal setup. And it's very hard to prevent Burn Rune from finding them.
And not only that, he has the perfect tempo play on 6 with the Dance of Death already in hand with Wizardess of Oz, so he already knows that's going to be a good play. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is about one of the best draws you can get with Burn Rune. Being able to empty your hand out right before Wizardess, dealing all of these points of damage. Good stuff all around.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's over, right? I mean, Gengur can't clear his old board the way Vetu tried to play around stuff like Dance of Death. Just Evo a Mage of Nightfall, Lyriel is your undoing.
Yep. even though he's able to clear, there's still an Evo point left. We already see the Dance of Death in hand, so Eplicas is going to win this game very quickly. Turn 6.
I think that was like a perfect game for Burn Room, like the strongest I've really even seen it, like all week, all these past few weeks even, and this season maybe. Just
we've been talking about variants, right? And like we saw the other end of it with Dirt Room / Burn Room, and now we're seeing the complete opposite end of that into just full and total annihilation. Eplicas moves on.
Eplicas with a 2-1 victory over Gengur, and I think we see the fruits of the labor of playing consistent decks that you kind of fall back to, the meta decks that are proven to be strong. Eplicas demonstrating what benefits you gain from that.